Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Melvi, coming to you live from Conscious Consumer Network headquarters here in Portugal. It is great, as always, to be with you again for another episode of Stop South African Genocide. And this is a very special episode because we've had some amazing events panning out over the last few weeks. And we really want to kind of get into that all with someone from behind the scenes, as myself and my beloved co-host Karin Smith will be talking about. There's much to know on this point, and it's been a very exciting time for the people of South Africa as history has been made. But I won't give too much away. Karin, why don't you let everybody in on what's been going on?
Hi, everybody, from very rainy and cold Texas, from 108 degrees the other day to about 60 degrees today. It's a shock to the system. But an even greater shock to the world is what happened on Sunday, when King Cornelius III came out in public in front of the walls of the Cape Town Castle and seceded from South Africa. Now, this step they had to take. There was no other way for this to happen, because they had tried every single possible means to be acknowledged as the first people of South Africa. And the ANC have put roadblocks up and refused to come to the table. So this brave man, who has all the international human rights and laws on his side, stood up and said, enough, held out his hand to all other races and said, join me, and we will form a peaceful nation where we can live side by side in harmony. Now, since we went live with that show, we have had a hate fest directed at the king, at the white people, and at ourselves. So I asked the Queen and the King who they could recommend to come on this show and explain to the world the legalities of this matter. And Professor Nagan is the legal advisor to the King of the Boy, and now the King of the United States of Good Hope. And he is here to explain to us all why this is legally, internationally acceptable. So, good afternoon, Professor. I'm so very glad to be here. Thank you very much at such short notice for giving up this time to come on our show.
It's a pleasure.
Professor Nagan, we have published on our promo for the show all your accomplishments and who you are. So if anybody wishes to question that, they're welcome to go and have a look. I would like to jump right into it and ask you, number one, how did a Khoi from Cape Town get to Yale University and be who you are today? It is an astounding thing. So if you just give us that little bit of human background, we can then go to the rest.
Well, I was a student activist at the University of Fort Hare. I was a very close friend of Chris Hani of the ANC. And I was brought into the ANC by these ANC progressives. Chris Hani, as you know, was murdered. And he had actually wanted me to come back then, but apparently there were certain members of the ANC that wanted me to come back. Essentially, my exit was a consequence of I was the guy that wrote up all the atrocities that the special branch were doing to the students at Fort Hare. And that's why they respected me. And one of the issues that did come up was so many students were thrown in jail just before they were getting their degrees. And then there was a question, is there anything we can do for them? And then the second thing was the notion of finding a means by which they could possibly complete their degrees, and that led to us organizing a prison education scheme. So when I got into exile, I raised the funds to launch the prison education scheme. Although the government wouldn't allow them to finish their degrees through London University, it had to be done through the University of South Africa. In addition to that, of course, I had written up many of the atrocities committed by the special branch, torture, beating up of people, lectures, and so on. But I wrote under a nom de plume because the editor of the Evening Post, a man by the name of John Sutherland, had been a friend of my father. So I could submit my reports with a secret name to him, and then all the stuff would be published with headlines. So the special branch were desperate to know who the bastard was that was fingering them, you see. So they were getting close to getting to me, and one night at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, one of the students came to my room. He'd been absolutely beaten up by the special branch, and then he said to me, "Winston, I just want you to know I didn't tell them anything, and they don't know shit." So I was able to get a scholarship to go to Oxford, but I still had to escape from South Africa, and that's what I did. That's another story. But I managed to get out, got to England, started the prison education scheme for political prisoners. We decided we wouldn't only have it for students, but for any political prisoner who wanted to take a correspondence degree, even if it was through UNISA. And then we also launched a campaign to have the British universities generate scholarships for South African refugee students that escaped. And so I continued that, but I heard that apparently Mbeki was very displeased with the success of these programs because they didn't initiate it. I never thought that I needed to get anyone's permission to do so. I thought, you do this because it's a decent thing to do. Yeah. So I got a scholarship to come to the States, and where I continued my training after Oxford. And Dennis Brutus, who was a very distinguished Khoi poet and intellectual, joined me. And he and I organized this campaign with the Olympic Games to get racism out of the Olympics, and in particular we focused on having Rhodesia expelled from the Olympics, you see, which we succeeded in doing. And then we worked from there. I was often called to testify before the UN on various aspects of apartheid and so on. And I was put onto the board of the International Defence League Fund for Southern Africa. And then subsequently I was elected onto the board of Amnesty International, and I became the chairman of the board of Amnesty International for the US. I was apparently talented enough to be made president of the Institute for the Policy Sciences at Yale. And I wrote quite a bit. In fact, I just published a major book on human rights about 6 months ago. And but apparently, after the changeover, when the ANC came into power, any position that came up in which the UN wanted me to apply, we usually found that the South African ANC would block me from the appointment. And the UN wanted to know what the problem was, and neither did I, so they brought me up there one day, and they introduced me to the South African ambassador. And he came over and said, "Oh, Winston, we know everything about you. Anything you want, you can have."
Yeah.
That was the last thing I heard from them. So apparently there was some problem there. And then 2 or 3 years ago, I heard from a colleague of mine in Oxford that apparently Muslim Deki had a black list of exiles that he did not want to return to South Africa. And apparently I was number 2 on his blacklist, you see. So it really shocked me. But you know, and then I purchased a house in Cape Town. Thinking I might retire there, but then when we went over there, someone tried to run my wife over the road twice. And so I thought, you know, they can hate me, but they can't go after my wife. That's not. So I just sold up and I got rid of everything of it. Then subsequently, I had an occasion to meet His Majesty, and we were discussing, and then I had some suggestions. Now, part of this didn't come out of my South African experience. I had, in the meanwhile, served as the abogado defensor of the Shuar nation of the Amazon in Ecuador. And the Shuar are also a First Nation. They've been in that part of the world for 5,000 years. And they were being cheated out of their land. They were being cheated out of their knowledge of traditional medicines and plants. These big companies were stealing their stuff and then converting it into medicines that they sell for a fortune, and the Shuar got nothing. So I looked into the situation of their land rights. I filed a petition before the American Commission, claiming all that land to be theirs, you see, which made me an enemy of the government of Ecuador. You know? And then I did work on a petition for their plant and intellectual property rights. I gave it to a colleague of mine who knew some people I have in the U.S. government, and the word came back that if my wife and I filed that petition, the mega pharmaceuticals would ruin both of us. You see. Well, I'm not a rich man, so I couldn't afford to destroy the life of my wife and kids. So I still have the petition. I've just submitted it somewhere else to be published as an academic petition. So when I spoke to the king, I noted that there was quite a similarity in the nature. What happened to their land rights? Why don't they have? Isn't there any way that they can assert title to it? Why has the government stopped inquiries into land rights at 1913, when ensuring that the Khoi would have nothing to rely on in law, because the law blocks them from having their claims to land equity being reviewed. So I thought, you know, there's something here. And then the king's wife was an expert in traditional Khoi medicines, and there are some. So we talked about that, and we began to be interested. And then I as I kept up with the Shuar nation, I checked out to see what the Ecuadorian government had been doing internationally. And they voted for all these decisions of the UN for the protection of First Nation rights. So I took those things and I drafted a document establishing the fundamental rights of the Shuar, you see, based on the UN documentation, and the government couldn't repudiate it because they voted for all these things, you see. So the Shuar held an assembly of 2,000 people in the middle of the Amazon, and they adopted the Declaration of the Fundamental Rights of the Shuar. It was the first one ever adopted, you see. So I took the same document and I redrafted it, and I sent it to His Majesty. I said, what did you guys think about this? And they modified and adopted it, and that became the foundation of their sort of foundation of constitutionalism for the new Republic of Good Hope, you see. So that's, and then we fed each other, and then in October and November last year, I was invited to be one of the distinguished fellows at the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies, you see. And this was me and a Swedish colleague of mine. He's a professor at the University of Lund. And so he said, well, what do you want? I said, no one has really written up this thing on the Khoisan. I'm going to do the Khoisan and social justice, you see. And then he was going to do more theoretical thing. So I wrote my paper up. It still hasn't been published. I think everyone was shocked, you see. I'll try and send this. As I remodify it, I'm going to deliver it at another major meeting. But I sent a copy to King Cornelius and Jenny's Queen. They loved it. And I suggested to him just a couple of weeks ago, if the Stellenbosch people are scared of publishing it, why don't we publish it? You add a few things and you and I will be the co-authors and we'll just publish it, you see. And but then the next thing I got was the Declaration of Secession, you see. And I went through that and I have made some suggestions. We can discuss that later if you like. But that's more or less the background.
My goodness. So you have been an activist against apartheid. It must be very strange to you to now, under the new dispensation, under the ANC government, do still have to be an activist.
I mean, it's one of those great ironies, I fought so hard for these guys. I was driven into exile, never saw my family again. And the lack of well, the problem was that Becky took over the intelligence stuff. And he collected the special branch files of those exiles that he thought if they came back would have an elevated status, you see. And so I don't know who, but I know Dennis Brutus, who was the most famous anti-apartheid activist, his file is missing. So I asked Dalla Omar, Dalla, you don't need to worry about me. Get my file, man. It'll tell you everything you need to know. Dalla said, no, Becky took those files.
Wow. Well, I just can't imagine it, that for all those years you have been writing, speaking, shouting about exactly the same thing, and a complete change of government for whom you were an activist has turned their backs on you yet again. And this is the thing that we have been speaking about very loudly on this show, is that the Khoi have been disenfranchised by everybody.
Yeah.
By everybody.
And I'm also disenfranchised in this sense, as you can see. So, but it hasn't bothered me because I've always, I always felt from my youth that I'm not just a parochial. I'm really a person of. You have to have a certain universal empathy with others. So it has not killed me because I've always found other important things to do, you see. So the fact that they didn't like me didn't mean that I went to Uganda and I established the first Human Rights and Peace Center there, you see. And I established the East African Journal of Peace and Human Rights in Uganda, okay? So, I mean, the fact that they didn't like me didn't mean I should stop doing anything.
So, Professor, I'd just like to ask you something.
Yeah.
The white people of South Africa have been to the United Nations. They've been to Amnesty International. They have been to the Unrepresented Nations Organization. And nobody wants to pay attention to their plight. And having been involved with these people, I'm sure that you understand better than I ever will. Why do they not want to pay attention? Why is it that these poor remnants of people in Africa are just being ignored by the world?
Well, I think part of the explanation is historical. The initial, I think, contacts between the Khoi and the Khoisan and the white settlers under Riebeck, disclosed one of the strengths and weaknesses of the Khoisan. The strengths is that they're actually very smart people. That's their strength. And their weakness is their smartness, you see. So now you got, when the Riebeck's crowd came in, they needed meat, whatever. They wanted to give a few trinkets to get the livestock of the Khoi. And the Khoi said, oh, these guys are a bunch of crooks. So why should we have anything to do with them, you see? And that led the company then to steal land and give it to these guys too. But once they felt they could just unilaterally take land, then it became anyone who, with a gun or whatever, could go ahead and take land. So they began to take the land of the Khoi and the Khoisan. And the Khoi in turn said, well, if they're taking our land, we'll take their cows and sheep. And that led to how dare they take our land and our sheep from the land we stole from them. And that resulted in two things. One, the company sanctioned genocide. Okay? Any Khoi that you saw, man, woman, you've got a right to shoot them. And that meant that the Khoi had to move as far as they could, and that meant these people could physically take their land and stuff. And then the others, by taking the land also, in traditional societies, land is not a commodity. It's not a thing that you buy and sell. You know, it's an aspect of the society. It's the basis of a society. You can't exist without it. And once you take that basis of existence away, then people are left destitute. And huge numbers of the Khoi were first taken into servitude, and then servitude was converted into slavery, you see. And although the history doesn't distill this adequately, there were more than 100 years worth of intermittent warfare. I mean, they didn't give up. So if you like, the toughest and longest and most consequential resistance to the plundering of the white settlers was from the Khoi. You see? So if you like, they are the real heroes. Okay? Now, in doing this, they often made arrangements with Xhosas and others in very useful alignments to resist conquest, but even the blacks were finally, disposed of as well. Now, what did happen in the 1800s was that there emerged within the Khoi a very strong cadre of leadership, and this was led by a Khoi leader by the name of Abdurrahman, Dr. Abdurrahman. His family were artisans, so they made some money, and he got sent to Glasgow for a medical degree. He came back and he began to organize for the scattered community of Khoi and mixed bloods and so on. And he really formed the first, shall we say, nationalist organization of blacks. And it was called the African People's Organization, you see. So this is before the ANC or anyone else, the Khoi understanding of getting beyond the racism, organizing yourself in different ways. And one of the keys that Abdurrahman brought to the Khoi was the centrality of education. They were smart people, so, and so you see some of the best high schools in all of South Africa were Trafalgar High School, and I can't remember the other, but these high schools produced some of the finest leaders in South Africa, intellectuals. Again, as I said, their intellectual strength was also their weakness, because they went beyond Abdurrahman and formed an organization called the Non-European Unity Movement. And there were two branches. One was led by an African by the name of Tabata. He was essentially a Trotskyite. But the rest were really social democrats. And they developed the first really social democratic platform for South Africa called the 10-Point Program. Now, the problem is this was very precocious intellectually. I mean, could you imagine getting onto the frontiers of social democratic theory among the Khoi? You know, no one else was thinking about it. And so the problem was that their intellectual gifts were somewhat of a threat to the ANC, which had not really developed an impressive intellectual leadership. So there was is the Khoi a little too smart, and we have got a long way to go before we can get there, you see. So you can see the ANC moved from being exclusively Xhosa to Xhosa Zulu to whatever, and then they brought the coloureds into the Coloured People's Organization, and then later the South African Indian Congress and so on. But it was always racially formulated, which is something that the Khoi didn't like. This, get beyond that. This racism is just a myth system to get us to beat up on ourselves. You see? So we need to find a way to have a much more inclusive humanistic identity where we all participate, you see. And so that history is still reflected by the fact that when the ANC got in, they kept all the colored intellectuals or core intellectuals out. The traditional leaders as well as the secular leaders, you see. No place, no room for them. And yet I think the nationalists really saw these leaders like Ben Keys and so on as a real threat, because they had a message that clearly repudiated racism, root and branch, you see. So that division has never been quite, and with the ANC and its own organization on racial lines, now we get to the point where it's now a Zulu ANC, okay? Everyone else is out, and so their inability to transcend the race factor has been quite difficult, even though Mandela and others proclaimed this. Those coming behind them, Mbeki is essentially a quasi-nationalist. Okay? He doesn't see things in broader terms. So I think, if you like, I think the failure of the ANC is that they could not transcend their own sense of parochial identity. That's when, and they failed their own constitution in that sense as well. Now, when I looked at the, when I was there in October sometime, the government had made a few statements, and they were really stupid. So I drafted a speech to the king, for the king. He reviewed it, and he delivered the speech. And these two ministers were sitting in parliament, and he delivered the speech. And one of the lines was, anyone could have said this is completely uneducated when it comes to understanding South Africa. These two guys ran out of the parliament. and the king just finished them up. They had no leg to stand on, you see. Now, one of the problems historically with the Khoisan is that this whole history of over 100 years with the resistance to the whites and white imperialism it's only written down in scattered things. It's not, in fact, in an odd kind of way, to recognize that on the part of the whites, that recognize the real enemy. To recognize that on the part of the blacks, here's a group that showed far more courage and tenacity than anyone else, you see. So this has never been popular on either side of the ledger. Now, I've never worked through the psychology of the white relationship with the Khoi, although it was quite prolific because you got almost 3 million colored mixed race people, Khoi. But the one thing that stands out almost brutally, if you like, is that one of the first things the Nationalist Party did when it came to power in 1948 was they enacted the Immorality Act, the prohibition of sex across racial lines. Now, why was there such an obsession with sex across racial lines, which was largely to do, which had virtually created the Khoisan colors? And the only explanation I can come with is there's a certain self-guilt which they projected. You know, it's their own lascivious behavior that they now want to repudiate with this act of super morality, you see, the immorality act, you know. And then the other thing was, God, these people might get married. Let's have the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act. Okay, how the hell do we know who's who? Population Registration Act, you know. So you've got all this stuff is tied in some way with the sexuality of the dominant white class there, and it's not that difficult to understand. They came there with about 50 men, I think, and about 20 women. They were no women. The only women they could have were the Khoi women, you know, which they then took and produced children who served as servants for them and so on, you see. So there's a certain odd measure of guilt, Calvinism, Christianity, sexuality that seems to be tied up in this. And then from the prohibition of mixed marriages, immorality, and then you go up to, oh, well, we need a Group Areas Act, and we get this rather rigid and brutal, oh, we can't have colored girls and boys sitting with whites, and we've got to have colored education, white education, Xhosa education, and then you have this whole ethnic mythology spinning out in somewhat brutal fashion because it's enforced by a police state and by police brutality.
Surely then, Professor, in 1994, you expected that all of that sort of thing would end.
That's correct.
And not to be fighting the same battle again for another 22 years.
And it was the shock when I began to see this. First of all, the level of social justice and social development, which would be of some benefit to the most discriminated against and the most historically suffering people in Southern Africa. They're out. They don't exist. There is no such thing as a, you know, and so there was even a struggle just to figure out whether their language rights could be in some modest degree respected. So then I began to say, well, I mean, why are they so, it's not just self-interest, there's something more politically implicated in a political implicated in this kind of thing. And it became more and more as the Khoi began to demand a stake in their land rights and asserting their lives being taken away. And of course, being so close to the white community, they suffered the most from things like job reservation and all the other levels of discriminatory prejudice that were meant to suppress and to keep down people. Okay? And so, but then the ANC comes in and refuses to respond to this at all. They came in with a promise of self-determination and a measure of allocated independence for all. And they just ignored it. They ignored their own liberation credo. And in fact, they substituted their liberation credo with a credo of corruption and greed and theft and government by kleptocracy, you see. So they not only repudiated Mandela and all the other Kathrada and all the other founding heroes of the ANC, they even repudiated themselves. You see. So, how can you be led by people that repudiate and deny the very ideals for which liberation was fought?
And for which you fought valiantly.
In which you all fought valiantly.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And which the role of the Khoi was fantastic in the liberation struggle.
There's another question I would like to ask you, because it is huge on social media right now. Especially from one political party in South Africa. By what right does King Cornelius III claim to be king of the Khoi? This is a huge question all over social media right now. Now, I know people, I've told them, directed them to go and do their homework and to find out that he's been around for a very long time, but the question still remains. And so if you could just explain that, please.
Well, he has the documentation to trace his birthright through blood, okay? But of course, the organization of authority and control amongst the Khoisan was not royalty in the monarchical authoritarian European sense. Okay? The monarch drew his authority from the people, and he understood that he governs and guides with the guidance of the people. Okay, and that's what he's done. All right, and the royal mantle gives him the historical authority, but his contemporary authority is the support of his people, and the fact that he stands for values of equality, freedom, and universal dignity that are the heart and soul of the history of the Khoisan.
Thank you for that, because these are questions that we're being bombarded with from every corner, and I'm unable to answer them. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure Mel has been itching to jump in. She's got a million questions for you.
I hope I can manage him.
Thanks, Karin. All right, let's get started. Of course, people are kind of going, right, so he has seceded and created this state, which was always traditionally Khoisan territory. What do you expect to see being the reaction from the current African National Congress government? And do you anticipate that there's going to be any kind of, I don't know, violence or retribution for this?
Well, it's very difficult to predict with Zuma because it's not so clear that he has any understanding of the principle of authority within the framework of political culture. He believes that now that he has the nominal title of the president, he can essentially act with impunity. And so his own corruption, which is well known in South Africa, he should have been prosecuted if a prosecutor had any professional guts to do so, you see. So the man is probably a potential criminal. So it's not at all clear how you can predict the behavior of someone whose mind is somewhat criminalized, that's for sure. The fact is that his own rule is deeply alienating and contested in many areas of the ANC itself, let alone people outside who are just watching the show. So I suspect that if they were to attempt some form of violence or retribution, I think there will be a big reaction to that. And I think they know that, and they could not resist it. I think if there were a reaction to it, they would be completely anarchically destroying themselves. So I think it's far too great a risk for them to risk a sort of violent type of opportunism.
You don't foresee them actually, potentially going out and arresting the king and charging him with sedition or something like that?
I can't see that. I mean, where's the sedition? He's just saying, look, people, is the record, and now let me just be clear, okay? The idea of secession is not new. It's there were, I think just a few days ago, they had a vote in Catalonia because they wanted to secede from Spain. The Basques have always claimed this as well. It has been resisted, but many people in Spain think the Basques should have that. These are contested issues. The Kurds in Iraq have had a referendum, and I think they overwhelmingly voted to secede. So it's not unusual. We had at least 3 or 4 of the Commonwealth independent states in which we had secessions, Georgia and a few other places, recently. So it's not unusual in that sense. What I think is worth looking at is the issue isn't just secession. It is also one of the most fundamental of international law prescribed rights in the 20th century. When the peace treaty was negotiated in Versailles after the First World War, in which there were 2 very important players, Jan Smuts of South Africa and President Woodrow Wilson of the United States. One of the issues that Smuts supported self-determination, because he self-determination for Afrikaners, you see. But Woodrow Wilson felt that colonialism was a worn-out idea. What people need is self-determination. And he launched that by creating within the League of Nations this organization for the protection of minorities and for the working towards self-determination of minorities all over Europe, you see. So that's how the self-determination issue came in as a matter of law under the, and that entity that seeks to protect minorities and indigenous people as well comes out of the International Labour Organization. It still exists today, okay? Now, the problem was that after the First World War, you did have the rise of totalitarian powers. And they didn't think about self-determination, Japan, Germany, Italy, and so on, Russia. And, but after the Second World War, the whole idea of national liberation movements, fascism and so on, gave greater credence and strength to the principle of self-determination. And by the early 1960s, the whole effort to decolonize the planet was built around the principle of self-determination. And self-determination became one of the most foundational principles of modern nation. Now, so what do you need to assert self-determination and possible sovereignty? Well, you need at least some qualities of statehood. You need an identifiable group of human beings who are connected, you know? They don't have to be purely ethnic. They can be, but they share the idea of a self-determined future. You need some defined or definable territory, so that the group is associated with some territorial space. Third, your claim has to anticipate, for self-determination independence, some form of governance or governing coherence. Okay? So you have to have something that you probably need to work on a model constitution, and that will assure that those who are in the group share these goals and ideals and so on. And in our age, we have very specific examples of this, you see. In the Balkans, when the wars were being fought for independence, Croatia, Slovenia, Macedonia, Serbia, and so on, the question became, how do we determine that Croatia or Slovenia or Bosnia meet the criteria of self-determination and independence? Actually, what the international community did was they set up something called the Banter Arbitration Commission. So these groups had to submit their proposed constitutions to the Banter Commission. They reviewed the constitutions to see how they approached human rights, how they approached the independence of the judiciary, how they approached the question of integrity of governance and authority and so on. Okay? And you see, if your constitution wrote in, oh, well, the Croats can discriminate against the Slovenians or whatever, that was, you couldn't use ethnicity as a basis to target people and things like that. So these constitutions went to the Banter Commission. When they approved it, that went to the EU. The EU approved it, went to the UN, the UN approved it. That's how most of them got on that route from self-determination to self-determined sovereign independence. And then finally, your entity has to have some capacity to manage and conduct foreign relations in a responsible manner. Now, what that means essentially is that the UN system is still committed to peace. So you really want to make sure that your government or your proposed government is committed to the principles that underlie the entire international system: universal peace, security, universal respect for human dignity, and the abolition of aggression and all these sorts of things. So you have to show some of those elements. In other words, if you're asking for self-determination and recognition of independence, someone said, you have to show that you're committed to some of those goals. You see, that you're opposed to racism, you're up for social justice and social progress, and so on and so forth. So those are the basic things that are implicit. It's not just a matter of secession, it's also a matter of consolidation, projection, and anticipation, you see. And now what the Declaration of Secession does is, and I think does this quite well, is it lists the failures of the ANC government successively to live up to the constitutional promise which was put into the Constitution. In effect, they've repudiated the very constitutional system that they proposed. And that means that to the extent that you can imply the compact, everyone is a stakeholder in the compact. And when you destroy the stake of a stakeholder, there is nothing there for them to support, you see. So I think you made the case that the government's own failures in authority, in honesty, in sustaining the rule of law on a universal basis, and its incapacity to recognize the existence and rights of one of the oldest First Nations on earth. I mean, it's a disgrace, okay? So the government has virtually no leg to stand on from the standpoint of authority. And if the last leg of ethnic authorities, well, we were here first, they weren't there first, okay? So far as I can tell, they clearly made a case that this particular form of government and its operational management has in effect been not to realize the self-determination of all the peoples, but to repudiate the self-determination and rights of a very significant portion of the population, the Khoisan and their allies. I'd be happy to expand on anything or expand on.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Winston. Obviously, there's a lot of concern behind the scenes as to sort of what role the king will be taking in terms of governing. Have you advised him with regards to how to set up a sort of workable constitution where the people basically are more involved in the governing of their own communities?
I think that's central. Now, I gave them, it wasn't really a constitution, it was a draft declaration, okay? A declaration of our principles. And that would have to be somewhat more clearly defined. This is not magical. I mean, you know, you've got to, all constitutions have some architecture of governance. You have an executive, you have to define the powers of the executive, the limits of the powers of the executive. You've got to have the legislature, and you define the scope and reach of legislative powers. And then there are the administrative powers, and then finally the judicial powers. And those judicial powers, in a sense, difficult though it is, it extends to the management of justice, the enforcement of the law, the role of the prosecutors and so on. And much of this, there's been a failure, I think, in the administrative justice in South Africa anyway. But what clearly he would have to do is he would have to have at least a shadow cabinet in which portfolios will be filled at a given time. He would obviously take suggestions as to who should fill in those portfolios, but for example, one of the most important portfolios would clearly be just from an economic point of view, the Minister of Finance. So, I mean, he'd have to figure out, but I think you'd want to have someone extremely experienced in the management of commerce, trade, and financial institutions. And then you'd have to bring in people trainable under that leadership. But then, you know, the core foundation of that has got to be complete honesty, complete transparency, and complete accountability. Then you need to strengthen, probably the heart of your system will be an independent judiciary. I think if you looked at the independent minded, there are many, many brilliant guys who could become independent judges and who are incorruptible and so on. So I think he could probably organize the framework of a court system, or Supreme Court and lower courts, and of course with the Western Cape being a part of the and Eastern Cape, there are already many good judges. I served on the Cape High Court, so I can assure you that there are many good judges who I think could be filling in. So you could get your judiciary going, you could get your finance going, you could get you'd have to have a Minister of Justice. That is more complicated because you really have to have people who have a strength of character and are willing to investigate whatever it is to be investigated and prosecute when necessary. And then you'd have to look at other portfolios. Probably one of the important ones would be, there's a large rural segment of the Khoisan, so you'd probably have to have a very progressive and enlightened agricultural and food ministry. But this is not, we can easily once you get some core good leadership there, then, and technology today is a marvelous thing. So it's not as though if you're trying to rearrange agriculture, it's going to take 20 years. I mean, there's technology now, and you can train ordinary people to do all kinds of stuff to speed that up. So I think that you'd have to have those shadow things going on. And then you probably have to, with this in mind, work up with more specificity and detail that I gave them, your Constitution, your Bill of Rights, and so on. And to ensure that the judiciary and the Ministry of Justice has the full power to enforce all the rights in the Constitution equally and without any affinity to any particular special interest. Those are the initial things that I think you would do. So you have a shadow government and a shadow constitution. Then you'd have to reach out internationally, because the foundations of modern self-determination and independence are partly rooted in the emergence of modern international law. So that means you've got to have other states who are willing to recognize you as a state bilaterally. And I'm sure that there are enough states that we can come up with in Southern Africa, in other parts of Africa, and Eastern Europe, probably Northern Europe and so on, possibly even in Latin America and so on, where we could get bilateral recognition. You don't need universal, but you need enough states to say, yeah, we recognize you. You've got territory, you've got population. You look like you've got a government, you've got a constitution that's acceptable and so on. And from that, then you have to develop your ministry, if you like, of foreign affairs, get a couple of people in who are familiar with the way things work diplomatically and the way things work through the agency of the UN, the African Union, and so on. And then you'd have to, of course, use your diplomatic skills. You'll be confronted by the South Africans trying to block you, that's for sure. But the case right now of their failures are so obvious, and the intolerance of the world to accept the level of overt and shameless corruption, I'm confident that the ANC are going to have a hard time getting around the case that can be made against them at this point. And I have no bad feelings. I mean, I think even if they were, even with the recognition of the independence of the Republic of Good Hope, there's no reason why, because of their geographic proximity, they can't have very close relationships in terms of shared trade. I mean, you can work amicably for the benefit of all. It doesn't have to be a conflict, okay?
Yes, absolutely. And obviously, South Africa has always, on a number of levels, had a unique and somewhat resourceful role in terms of providing gold, minerals, whatever else to the rest of the world. It's obviously going to be interesting to see how this impacts on the bigger picture with regards to South Africa's economy. At the moment, we're sitting with the rand at junk status. We've got so many people living in absolute squalor and poverty. And these are the things I think that need to kind of be addressed immediately, as the severe dire straits that some of the people are in and some of the more urgent situations. And I guess with that comes a lot of logistical challenges, but also a lot of resource challenges. A lot of people are kind of going, okay, well, this is all very good and well. We had the succession of a king. Perhaps this is a genuine step in the right direction lawfully and possibly recognizable by international precedent. What is going to be done on the ground to alleviate the suffering immediately, and how are we going to be able to do it in a way that's effective?
Well, there are a multitude of successful economies in the world. They don't just depend on one or two resources, gold or whatever. I mean, that's and I would submit that we do need, and the king himself would have to think through. I'm one of the actors in this field. I have to shout, but we think that the central issue of value in any society is its human capital.
Yes.
We would have nothing without human beings. All that gold in there, it means nothing unless people do something with it, okay? So the most central thing that you got to recognize economically is not the GDP or any of these abstractions. You got to recognize, where does the wealth of a society come from? And it comes from human capital. So you got to invest in human capital to promote the exchange of goods, services, people, with honesty and with integrity. Okay? So I'm not a pessimist about this. I've been working with my colleagues in the World Economy to say that we need to move beyond capitalism and socialism. We need to move to a new economy of investing in human capital where the real potentials of prosperity lie. Okay.
Wow.
Sorry, that's...
Wow, that's amazing. And particularly for someone who's gone through the sort of mainstream indoctrination of something like Yale University, it's interesting to see that you have evolved consciously towards the absolute truth, which is, we can't eat gold and diamonds.
Yeah.
We really do have to start being honest about where the true value lies, and that it's us. Our sacred labor is what has value, not the pieces of paper issued by the Reserve Bank.
That's right. And so when we realize that everything that has projected the amazing achievements in our time is a function of human beings and human capital and the amount we invest in education and so on. But I am a firm believer that amongst the I think, I may be wrong, but I'm prejudiced here, but amongst I've been able to work with the Afrikaner elites and with the Khoisan in particular, and these are some of the most amazing people in the world, okay? They have energy, they have drive, they have initiative, but they have no opportunity. So if we open up those doors, prosperity, I think, will be immensely achievable in a short time. Okay?
Yes, absolutely. And also when we start really, a lot of the problem with South Africa as well is that we're still paying back huge amounts of money in supposed imposed national debt from institutions such as the IMF, World Bank. You say you're part of an organization of scholars. How do they perceive or suggest that we get past this imposed debt that, just makes the problem worse and worse and worse? No one gets any better except a few at the very top.
I haven't looked at this for years now, but one of the aspects of the debt at the time was the borrowing done by the apartheid government to impose apartheid. And for these people to have invested in what was clearly a flagrant crime against international law would seem to me to reduce any equity or right they have to repayment. Okay, but the South African government didn't take that upon them, and they accepted the whole goddamn thing without even saying, "Look here, there's some legal issues that we're going to look at." Maybe they owe us for losses we've taken over these years. So that, you raised some interesting questions, and but even the bank itself is undergoing change now. I've got one of my star students who works in the bank, and they are looking at these issues not in this narrow econometric sense, but they want to know is, how does our work contribute to human advancement? How does it help the media in different societies? How does it promote the values that make a society successful in the long run? But this is not a discourse that has been fully resolved internationally. It's still a contested domain. There's no question about it. We are, and one of the things that my organization has tried to do is the World Academy isn't rooted in any particular state sovereignty. So we don't have a sovereign agenda to promote. We are trying to promote a global agenda that recognizes the interdependence and the indetermination. And the way forward is by cooperation and by kind of stuff, peace. So, but we live in an imperfect world, so some of those imperfections can be magnified in the context of South Africa. But then the other side of the coin is, you've got to make sure that, how does your representation manage this, okay? And rightly or wrongly, when you have wrongs like this, you need competent lawyers with guts to get up and say, hey, you don't have a legal right, yes, so, if you want, we'll take you to the International Court of Justice to test this, you see. But South Africa didn't do any of these things. It just wanted to get in bed with the big guys, a lot of dough, and, lending money, which they can then use for corrupt purposes, don't even pay it back. So part of the price of South Africa and the ANC has been complicit in its own economic disadvantages, you see. Not that there aren't problems on the other side, but you've got to be careful that you have the adequate professional and legal representation to make sure that your own interests that are just are secured. Okay, you can't avoid that; it's still there. And I can't tell you we live in an ideal world because the form of global economic organization today, which I'm a critic, is loosely called neoliberalism. And what we've seen with neoliberalism is that we have increasingly expansive levels of global inequality, okay? All the studies show this. And so there's got to be something wrong with the system. Now, what we claim is, well, this is a system that's investing you invest in money to make more money, but the money doesn't go into manufacturing, it goes into speculative. That's why we had the crisis in 2008, 2009. And so we have an imperfect system and we haven't corrected it yet. Even in the US, when Obama enacted the laws to put restraints on bank speculation, okay? Well, we got it through and we got out of the recession. But right now the Republicans are trying to remove those restraints on the banks so they can get us back into the same mess that we were in before, you see. So these are contested domains, and even if from a small country, you have to recognize exactly what's happening, the circumstances under which you can borrow or return or whatever, and you've got to make sure that if you're making a deal with X, it isn't only for the benefit of X, you've got to know what your return is, you see. So it's still a complex game, and I personally, I don't think the ANC did work its way through all this carefully. I heard some terrible rumors. One bank president in Croatia told me that his bank had billions of rands, but they couldn't be removed by the South African minister or whatever, because to remove the money would disclose the existence of the money and who was connected up with it, and how would they explain that, you see. So the money is still sitting in some Croatian bank, they're doing nothing. So I'm sorry, we, even with the imperfections of the ANC, we also have a global world where we still have contestations to secure self-determination, independence, and integrity.
Karin, do you want to jump in here?
Well, Professor, the more one hears about worldwide affairs and the higher one looks, the more shocked I am. I thought at this stage I was practically unshockable by anything. Having seen the antics of the ANC, I thought I had seen it all. But every time I speak to somebody like yourself, I discover how corrupt the entire damn world is. Is there nowhere that is not full of self-interest? Is there not a government that cares about the people instead of their own back pockets? Is there? I don't understand, because I know that I spoke to the king and one of the first things they were going to do was secure their borders, which makes perfect sense to me. Because you look at Europe and see what has happened with their open border policy. Europeans do not have any identity anymore. And it's going to become one Europe. And so you won't have self-pride, national pride, etc., etc. And I think that is very important, that especially if you're dealing with the South African Afrikaners and Boers, they are very proud people of who they are. And the Khois as well. They are very proud of who they are and who they are.
I think that's a strength, okay?
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I do not see that as a weakness. I think it's a very, very good thing. But they are very nationalistic people. I am a South African from South Africa. And I get very angry when people tell me I'm not African because I'm white. It upsets me desperately. I just can't deal with it. So who we are is defined very much by where we are from. So the whole closed borders, nationalistic thing, I personally don't subscribe to the New World Order. I don't subscribe to Obama's picture of Mel, and I might differ on it, but I really don't. I think one has to have a sense of your history, a sense of belonging, a sense of what group you belong to. Not necessarily, I don't mean color, but I mean not ethnicity, but your culture. Mel and I are very strongly proud of our cultural South African backgrounds. And so that country made us who we are today. I feel that you're extremely correct in what you were saying about the ANC. The ANC didn't think this through. They're interested in their back pockets. But from what you said, the entire world is like that. So how do we then make sure, or at least as best we can, that the United States of Good Hope is a transparent, upfront, humanistic government, rather than the Zuma type of government where you have 700 crimes behind you that were swept under the carpet?
Well, that's the challenge, okay? And I think you're right. There is a cultural transmittable sense of it. Okay? And even a society that is nationalistic can get lost when it loses its cultural sense of rectitude and a level of idealism, which is tied to self-fulfillment. I think ultimately the value of culture is it provides the individual human being with a sense not only of who they are, which is important, but even more importantly of what they might become. Okay? And so we're not frozen cakes of history. We're the cake, but the cake has to rise and to be edible and to be digestible and to perform a service for the rest of the planet. Now, I don't agree with you that the entire planet is corrupt, although there's a huge amount of it there, that's for sure. And it is not the case that even the great societies are bereft of corruption. But it's one of those great challenges for mankind that we confront. And, well, sometimes you have to confront it at the global level, sometimes at the continental level, but sometimes at the national and local level where I think it's most effective. Because it is the case that you have come through a culture, in part, you've probably been involved in a complex struggle yourself to make sure that you have a sense of who you are and why you're worthwhile being who you are, okay? And we are all ultimately stuck with that existential challenge. Unfortunately, people give up too soon, have come through culture with little empathy, little kindness, absence of generosity. And I think that's a global existential challenge, but sometimes that can be remedied by groups that already have a pre-existing sense of identity, have inherited a certain sense of being and becoming, if you like, and that becoming can start in a small place, but it can spread out globally, it can spread out continent-wide. The example is not one that we can give up because we will lose our humanity if we do so.
The other question that we have been asked a lot, and it's been very difficult for us because we were sworn to secrecy and we're still at this point only allowed to give out so much information and maintain so much. It's very difficult for us to be the media face of this without talking about it. So the power sharing, it has been extremely difficult to do. But what people are asking, I think it's a very valid concern, is how will the power sharing work? The treaty was based on power sharing. Now, as you yourself have said, the South African Constitution was based on that too. The entire referendum in 92 was based on power sharing, and yet it never happened. From day one, it never happened for any of us, unless you were the majority group there. So how is it going to work here? Because I think that is a very big concern of both groups of people.
I think we haven't understood precisely why the Constitution hasn't worked. In my opinion, the succession from Mandela to Mbeki would have gone through Chris Hani. And Chris Hani was a real Democrat. Okay, he was left, but he was open and so forth. But Mbeki was schooled in the USSR, and he was a prime example of the Stalinistic mentality. So right from the get-go, when Mandela was out, there was already the subtle change toward a covert degree of Stalinism. And the way he did that in part was to keep out of South Africa some of the most talented exiles that would have seen through his ruse quite quickly, you see. So he got away by basically, like his own scandal, the scandal of the arms gate. He simply took it over and said, well, no, this is going to be an internal matter of the ANC. It didn't even become an internal matter. So the fact is that that South Africa's leadership by the Mbeki wing of the party moved in the direction of a closed, somewhat authoritarian state. And then things just followed on from that. But people never quite fully realized it, because part of Mbeki's authoritarianism was to basically dole out favors to his pals and to make a lot of rich guys who he thought would be his, like oligarchs in Russia, back in Putin. And so I think that is a challenge. I think that I don't think this will be a problem for the Afrikaners and the Khoi, and partly because I think each side has enough intellectual strength and muscle and human perspective to ensure that there's integrity in governance. Now you can secure that by strengthening the Ministry of Justice, strengthening the development of NGOs in terms of public responsibility and accountability and so on. And I actually drafted the proposal when the ANC was drafting the Constitution. I had recommended in a speech to the ANC that South Africa should consider the development of a right to human development as a constitutional right in the Constitution, you see. And they were all laughing and jeering and, and I remember it was a Kara Asma, somebody said, who the hell has heard of a human right to development, And then I said, does the ANC oppose a human right to development? Because if you do, you're the only goddamn national liberation movement that I know of that opposes a human right to development, you see. So then somebody came to my room that night and asked me to draft the proposal and justify it. And it was a guy named Fikile Mbambi. He said, I'll join you in that. So I drafted and gave it to Fikile. He looked it over. We sent it to them. We never heard from them again. Although somebody from the University of the Western Cape published my article in a book that she wrote. Although I don't have a copy of it, but and in that, you see, what I did was I said, look, if you want to give some teeth to this human right to development, you must create the a commission on the human right to development. Okay, and that commission should have one level of it is going to look at social empowerment. Another is going to look at legal representation for the most disadvantaged. They can assert their rights. And I went through a list of things that you could do to empower people and to keep the government honest. Maybe that's why they didn't want to hear about the human right to develop. So I thought it was my finest hour, but I failed. Sorry.
Can I ask some questions with regards to the restructuring of the current infrastructure, resources, obviously that would have to be redistributed, entire workforces that I think would have to be repurposed. For example, hopefully one of the things that would happen once we kind of alleviate poverty is there'll be alleviation of crime, petty theft, things like that. But also there needs to be a readdressing, I suppose, public posts such as teachers, nurses, and police officers, or I would prefer to call them peacekeepers, because in an ideal world we shouldn't really need to be police. We should be self-responsible. What comes with the King's proposal is actually an entire conscious movement, not just a succession, but a conscious movement of the entire populace of South Africa towards a more peaceful, free, fair, just, sustainable existence. And I think that's what needs to be recognized here.
Okay, you're right. And you've stated the thing in better language than I could. But what I saw here was that the biggest obstacle to human development is the lack of empowerment. You don't go anywhere if you're just stuck at the bottom, So this means you need to look at ways ordinary people can be empowered in the workplace, in the schools, and so on. And even students have to be taught the responsibilities. If you're empowered, how do I exercise the empowerment that I have? Okay. But the most crime comes from the alienated who are disempowered most of the time. Okay. So that's why you have to have a willingness to get people to go out and vote. Okay. To get people to participate in the system and so on. And when they have reasonable demands, you can't have people blocking them, whether they be in business or government or whatever. There's got to be a way of managing those reasonable demands, because human needs are human needs no matter what you say, okay? They are universal. I can list them if you want me to, even if it's up thought. But that's, so I don't think it's a mystery, but every government, most governments, now that we're in power, well, the idea of empowering the riff-raff out there, my God, is people get scared of that, okay? Because that means now we've got to be more accountable. Now we've got to be more transparent. Now we've got to be more responsible. And no one wants to be responsible, accountable, and transparent. People, even the best of governments try to resist this. But it's not a mystery, okay? And if you give up on those things, well, things are not going to look great, So in my opinion, I think the best chance that the Euro-Afrikaners and the Khoi Afrikaners have is the lessons they've learned, okay? At least you got a big advantage. You know what to avoid, okay? That's a start, okay? You don't have to repeat the same goddamn problem generation after generation, okay? It's not a mystery, okay? Sorry, I know I'm preaching to the converted already, but sorry.
No, but that's so true, because this is the fundamental truth that we kind of have to fundamentally glock if we are actually going to effect long-lasting holistic change. It's all very good and well to, we've seen this so much in history. One government goes out of power, another one comes in, lots of promises. We saw this with the Rainbow Nation. As we've seen, the Rainbow Nation turned out to be nothing but what a rainbow is, which is nothing but an illusion of light and shadow. There was no substance to it.
We've seen it in the U.S. Donald Trump promised universal health care for all, and he's been trying his best to deprive millions and millions of Americans of health care, okay? The same guy.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, this is it. Is that unfortunately we're faced with a worldwide culture of global government corruption, where the corporatocratic interests are put above the interests and best and well-being of the population, to the point where people are, being genocided through consumerism, more or less.
And I think what you got, this is a tough question, because the fundamental problem is that the corporate culture is highly efficient in the production of goods and services. You can't wish them away.
Yeah.
But the question is, how do you manage to secure corporate responsibility, corporate accountability? How do you get them to pay their taxes? They don't even pay their taxes anymore, you see. So and to give you one illustration, the United Nations has a code of ethics for multinational corporations, okay? Not one multinational corporation has signed up to the code of ethics that they drafted and gave to the UN. Sorry.
Wow.
So there's no mystery. I mean, some of these multinational corporations have been involved in human rights violations, violating their own ethics, and they don't want anyone to know what they've been doing, And then our Supreme Court recently said, well, can you really sue a corporation for human rights violations? So this is not a mystery, but enlightened thinkers can wind up with a corporation we exempt from the normal social responsibilities of every other social organization. So you're quite right, but that doesn't mean this is easy, you know. But you have to start somewhere. Okay? If you have a new state, maybe we could start with a charter of corporate responsibility, which protects them legitimately, but also doesn't permit them to go overboard, exploit, don't pay their taxes, murder other people, destroy their competitors, and so on. Okay? Sorry.
Yes, there definitely needs to be a move towards more conscious consumerism as well as conscious entrepreneurship. And that, again, it's great to hear you, Winston, talk about, you know, when you talk about human value, that's certainly a more evolved way of being, because that we for so long have put the value in things that actually really have no value, pieces of paper with figures on them, you know, that we pay for milk and bread with, which nowadays isn't even backed by a gold standard. So it's no reputation legal value.
We have far too much conspicuous consumption as a model, you know, and we have to find a way to we don't need what we don't need, okay? But still, I mean, that's not just South Africa. There's a huge amount of that.
But surely that's also a responsibility of educationalists and the media. I mean, at the moment, the media is used for advertising, it's used for brainwashing people into buying more product. Surely we have to repurpose media to be less focused on generating advertising revenue and more focused on educational modalities that benefit humanity.
Yeah, and we unfortunately, we don't have enough good models for that yet, I don't think. But again, you know, sometimes a new state with a clean slate, you can come up with models, and models can be replicated. Models often serve as prototypes, and we forget how important a prototype is for the expansion of human benefit and human consciousness, you see. But I mean, you know, you're tackling some of the tough problems. The media is, of course, one of them, that's for sure. I don't doubt and don't deny that. That's absolutely for sure.
Yeah, well, we would love to speak to King Cornelius and give him some advice on how to go about setting up a completely ethical and independent media world within the new United States of Good Hope, because you know, the way that the media is set up at the moment, really, I feel that it is part of the larger problem, a very big part. And if we want to change the world, we really do have to change the media and the way it is structured, the high volume advertising, and really
political control of the media too. I mean, SABC is controlled by the ANC, so you know, you just get one party line. I mean, it's anyway, we've taken up quite a lot of issues, but I think we can't get too far ahead of the practical game, but we need to think ahead to ensure that we are following a path that is ethically, morally, and in every other, in terms of human needs and human desires, it follows a reasonable path to a reasonable future with a reasonable distribution of goods, services, values, a reasonable distribution of opportunity, freedoms, capability, freedoms, and ultimately the maximized, the best thing to do is the maximized value added human capital.
Yeah, absolutely. Karin, is there anything you want to say here?
I just wanted to say that we have been presented, the world has been presented with a blank slate, and we can make it or break it. And we need to make sure that as South Africa has been the blueprint for the rest of the world for many years now, we need to make sure that the United States of Good Hope is the perfect, or as perfect as people can make, because we will never be perfect, but the best example of how a country should be, because then we can really have some pride in what we've done, and we have then learnt from our past mistakes. And that is my hope and prayer for this.
And I would like to add one thing. I would like to see the foundations of the new state of the Republic of Good Hope to be founded in the most explicit sense on the treasure of human capital.
But that is kind of what King Cornelius has said all along. His one of the most important things he feels is the education of the children, so that we are preparing people for a better future and laying the foundation ourselves to hand them a better future than we were given. So I'm just so very excited about this, because it is an opportunity that doesn't occur in anyone's lifetime. It is a once in a gazillion years opportunity to get it right from the foundations up. Now I'm desperately praying and hoping that we can make this work.
Yes, I think that the future of the Republic of Good Hope is a prototype that the whole of Africa would ultimately benefit from, and maybe even the rest of the world. But we have to do it right. It can be done right. And the Khoisan peoples have an immense tradition of commitment to human freedom and dignity. And the Afrikaners had to fight in a terrible imperialistic war against Britain, which sought to secure their genocide. Both of these cultures have bring a great deal of knowledge, understanding, and I think we will have a very powerful, unified force for good in Africa.
So what would be the step, Winston, what do you reckon happens now? People are going, so what happens next? What are the immediate changes we'll see happening?
Well, we have to wait and see what the government tries to do. But my gut feeling is they're not going to overplay their hand, because it would be too risky for them. In the meanwhile, I think it's important for King Cornelius to organize a shadow cabinet. I think he should focus on the judiciary, the justice, finance, and a few other things. And then we need to develop these capacity to manage international relations, to reach out. But these have to be done simultaneously. And I told him I'd be more than happy to help him in any of these fields. I am connected to a world organization, so these are not politicians, they're scientists and stuff like that. Out to some of them to reach out to their own governments and see what we can do to recognize the new republic.
Wonderful. Wonderful. This is what we need. We need the sort of really strong intellectual minds who understand what needs to be done to create a sustainable world, coming forward, standing up and giving advice to those people in the power who are lawfully able to effect this kind of change. And as King Cornelius has said, it should by all means be a bloodless revolution. There's no need for there to be any violence.
Absolutely no, it's not necessary. And it's not in the interest of the ANC anymore.
Yeah, I would agree. Karin?
So, Professor, is it now just a wait and see game? How long do we wait to see how the ANC responds?
I don't think you need to wait and see how they respond before you respond. I think you have to just carefully plot your next steps.
Yeah.
In anticipation. Okay? And as I said, you want the most important thing that has to be done is to state clearly that this is a internationally founded principle, claim of the right to self-determination and sovereign independence. That wasn't quite clearly stated in the breakup. And then I would simultaneously look at some key ministries or some key players. You probably need to get some very wealthy businessman to invest in this because we will be dependent on trade, investment, and so we will be exchanging goods and services and training and so forth in this sense. And there's enough talent there to move that agenda forward. And then he and I know enough people in law that we could get some well-known figures to get a judiciary going and so forth. And then we can get a Ministry of Justice going and a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we'd have to look at the other ones, you know, the delivery of social services, water, education, and so on. I have given him the name of a leading educator in Cape Town, who was my teacher, and who was the principal of one of the top high schools in South Africa. A brilliant educator, and I said that, you know, we could approach my friend. He would be a wonderful Minister of Education. But these have to be done almost simultaneously. You get this one, you got to just go. That's what I told him on the phone when I spoke to him yesterday.
So would it be opposing the existing government that's already there? I mean, like, how do you take over the management of things like the educational infrastructure without coming, you know, kind of to heads with what has already been put in place?
The first thing you've got to do is you've got to have a government, because you can't claim sovereign independence without at least the shadow of a government. Okay, and then the government. See, then what you're trying to do right now is to put a structure together to secure the international recognition of statehood, bilaterally first, and then through the African Union and the UN. You know, the UN, it goes to the General Assembly, and from the General Assembly it goes to the Security Council, and they vote it. I don't think that that we will have a problem if we do it right, because I think there are enough UN reports, special rapporteur reports, which have really told the South African government what they should be doing, and they never did. So the South Africans have ignored the UN. I think if you make a good case and we present it to the General Assembly, they will get recognized. I think they can get recognized before the and Security Council. There would be no veto there because none of the 5 permanent members of the council would have any reason to veto. So that's the practical thing. Then once you get recognized, the government's hand, if it now tries to do anything, then it could be accused of an act of aggression, which is a violation of the UN Charter, you see. So what you need to do is the recognition puts security around you anyway. And from the recognition comes the exchange of diplomatic protocols, recognition. You get into UN bodies and things like that, you say, and so forth. And then you can also generate funding from international sources to help fund the government. A good minister in terms of finance and trade and so forth can help to develop the major connections and ties with government and manufacturing and trade and investment and so on. But that's the way I would envision it. Now, I'm not in South Africa, so I don't know the specific details, but that's more or less what I gave you, because I'm somewhat familiar with what you have to do to get yourself recognized as a state. And technically, national, this is known as recognition. Okay, and usually the politics are when you get 20 or 30 states recognizing you, you then should be able to take it to the UN. I don't know what the politics are of the African Union. I know there's competition between South Africa, Nigeria, and a couple other states. And some of the states of Africa are somewhat skeptical of the South Africans, you see. But I don't know. I never followed up with the African Union, so I don't know what they would have to test that out themselves and find who's sympathetic and who's not.
Thinking of that, there's a question we have not asked. How does BRICS fit into this? How does the whole Russian and Chinese connection going to work about this?
Okay. Well, I think that the Chinese do have some economic ties with South Africa, but I don't know what the extent of those are. And I think they will just follow whatever the mood is. I don't think they're going to exercise any aggressive tendency here, you see. The Russians are a bit more complicated because they actually went into several of the states of the Commonwealth of Independent States, and they organized secessions. I think 4 or 5 of them, you see. Now, I haven't followed that, but I don't think the Russians are going to complain about this one when they've been doing it in their own backyard. So I think you might get the Russians and possibly the Chinese as just following on whatever the lead is. I don't think they'll be. Now, the ANC used to have good ties under the communist Russia, but Putin is a bit different, so I don't quite know what the ANC's relationship is to Putin's Russia. That I don't know. And from what we can tell, the Putin's Russia has been less ideological and more opportunistic. So if they think it's in their interest, they'll back the Khoisan. If they think it's not in their interest, they won't. But I don't have the detailed knowledge of precisely how that relationship has evolved since Mbeki's death, Mbeki's removal from power.
Professor, thank you very, very much. From my point of view, you have answered so many questions that I've been asked, and I feel empowered now. So you have invested in human capital in your own way, because now you can go out there and spread that capital around a little bit. Yeah. And I feel more confident in myself. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Yes. Thank you very much, Winston. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Conscious Consumer Network talking to us about this amazing development on the global political scene, the United States of Good Hope, which you have been an advisor to the Khoisan King, who is in fact the official sovereign of what is known as South Africa, or at least part of it. And we look forward to seeing how this entire episode unfolds over the coming days, weeks, and months. And we honestly, Karin and I, just have the greatest hopes and ask everyone to be positive and supportive, because if ever we had an opportunity to have a reset and put things right, here it is. I've always known that if the change is going to come, it's going to come from Africa. And most certainly South Africa has the potential, with all the resources, both in terms of, food, all the other resources, but human capital, an amazingly diverse and beautiful, vibrant, energetic culture that's just got so much to offer. And we are going to make the change that we so desperately need. And now we have the opportunity to do it. So please, everybody, this is a great opportunity. Be positive about it. I know there's a lot of skepticism out there. Karin and I have been under constant attack, but if anybody has any legitimate questions, please do send them to us, and we'll obviously try to address the King. And of course, Winston, if there's anything we want to get clarified from you, we will approach you directly. But
I'll be more than happy to respond. Bye. Bye.
Thank you very, very much. I hope this was as educational for our audience as it was for us. And I hope it answered a lot of your questions, because we have been a little bit overwhelmed the last few days. And I feel freer now. So thank you very, very much, Professor. It was so great of you to do this.
Okay. Thanks a million for having me. Appreciate
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you for all those who have tuned in across the world. It's been obviously an absolute pleasure to be able to unpack this bag, because this is a great moment in human history. Thank you to Professor Winston Nagan for joining us all the way from America. Thank you as well, Karin, who's joined us from Texas, our beautiful, amazing co-host who does so many amazing things on her side. And of course, thank you to you, the viewing public, taking an interest in what is going on, because this is literally history in the making, and great things are about to happen. That's it from me, Mel V, coming to you live from Conscious Consumer Network. It's been great to be with you, and we'll see you again.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.